We did our training down here in Alabama, Camp Upton, I guess it was called, yeah. Anyway, we completed our training and we were sent up to New York, the port of embarkation. This was in November of 1944. We were sent to, I believe it was Weymouth, England, and there we were waiting. And then Christmas Eve rolled by. It was nobody expected anything, but then suddenly at the very, very last minute, pack your bag, get on the train, boom, you're going. It was just like that. We never even had a chance to really pack all the things. Now, I'll tell you a little story here. There was one company, Company F, and the captain of that, I forget what his name was, but he was a West Point graduate. And they were really the crack outfit in the 2nd Battalion. They were number one in everything, extremely efficient and everything. So they were the first ones packed, and there were 2 trains that left Weymouth for Southampton for the port of embarkation there. We, of course, were slow, and we got on the second train. Well, they were on the first train, and they got there. You say, what's the difference? When the first ones got there, they got on to Leopoldville first, and they went down in a hole in the bottom because they loaded from the bottom up. And we slowpokes got up on deck B, I believe it was. So we were up on the top. Anyway, what happened was about, I guess, 4 or 5 miles just outside of Cherbourg, boom, we hit this sudden thud, and a German torpedo hit our stern, and right in the stern, and poor old Company F were wiped out completely. I think there were about 4 guys that survived. They happened to have been up in the latrine when the torpedo hit. And the captain went down in the hole, and he rescued as many, tried to rescue as many men as he could, but he ended up drowning in the ship as it was. I ended up coming up on deck. I remember it was really a mixed crew there. The captain was Belgian. He couldn't speak any English. The officers were British Navy, and the crew were Congolese. And I remember coming on deck, the crew had all their suitcases. They went headed straight for the lifeboats and left the ship. And we were always wondering, what are we going to do next? Us lowly enlisted men there. Anyway, we come up on the deck waiting for orders that never came. And we waited and waited. They taught us in the Army how to climb up cargo nets when we left the ship, but nobody instructed us on how to release these life rafts from the ship. And we hacked it away with our bayonets and rifles and whatever we had. Nothing worked. Later on, of course, when the ship sank, they all came off automatically, but we didn't know this at the time. Anyway, I got up in the forward deck of the ship, and if you ever saw pictures of it, it had a loading mast in the front and one in the back. And we must have sat there, I think the torpedo hit us somewhere around 6 o'clock, and this was something like 8 o'clock, almost 2 hours. That thing just sat there, and we're there, highly disciplined enlisted men, waiting for order that never came. I'm not kidding you. Morale that started to get a little questionable. Where's our wonderful leaders, and what are they doing? They were all too afraid of breaking radio silence, is what happened, we learned later on. Anyway, it was all shushed up. Anyway, the ship sank stern first. Oh, before that, yeah, a British destroyer came alongside, and they took off some men jumping from one ship onto another. But the seas were about 4 to 6 feet at that time, and it was pretty. I could see them from where I was sitting. These ships would just bang together like that, and some men would jump across. Some made it, some didn't, and got, you know what happened later on. That's what happened. So my buddy and I, we're sitting up at the very bow, the pointy tip of the ship, and we're watching all this. And I said, no, I'm not going to try that. I'm going to take my chances swimming in later on. Having been born in Long Island Sound, I knew the water. A lot of these poor guys came from the Midwest, and they had no water experience whatsoever. At any rate, the ship finally went down, and it was almost pointing straight up and down. I had my arm under the rail hanging on as long as I could, but then finally my feet were just dangling in air, and I lost my grip and slid down the deck and hit the water. Well, I started to swim. There was one raft, but it was full of everybody, and I tried to start swimming away. Of course, we had our overcoats on and boots and everything like that. To swim in the full sense of the word was out of the question. Next thing I know, I got pinned under the mast, and I started going down. And I must have gone down, I would say, about 15 feet. I use that figure because I've been in swimming pools about that depth since then, and I remember the pressure on my ears, and that's how I gauged. I must have gone down about 15 feet. And yes, I'll tell you right now, everybody, your whole life, you do review it at that time. I also knew growing up on Long Island, the water, the drowning was probably about the easiest form of death there is. All you have to do is just inhale once, fill your lungs with water, and you're out like a light, and that's it, the end of it. So I determined I was going to hold my breath as long as I possibly could. And I did. And I was just about at the point where I was ready to take that big gulp. When I think what happened, my theory, is the stern of the ship hit bottom. I think it was only about 200 feet of water there, something like that, maybe like that, and it started to roll on its side. I did have a life preserver on with the buoyancy on it, and at 15 feet depth there must have been a tremendous force of buoyancy. Anyway, next thing you know, I shot up to the surface like an arrow, and broke, the water, and I saw the moon. It was, to this day, it was the most beautiful moon I ever saw in my life. The water was covered with oil. Thank God there was no fire or anything like that. And I did make my way up to a life raft, and thank God there was 3 other guys on there, so it was about 2 feet above the water. Anyway, they pulled me up, and I got into the life raft. We drifted around. We didn't realize that there was, by this time, everybody from the Cherbourg harbor was out there. All the boats were picking up survivors all over the place. Later on, I met a friend of mine who was a neighbor of mine at home, and he was a tugboat captain at that time. And he told me the shore side of the story. They were all getting ready for Christmas Eve dinner, and everybody having parties, getting shot in their shoes, getting ready to go out and have a ball. And then somebody knows, hey, what's that ship doing out there? It's been out there all afternoon, and nobody knew. Nobody, until finally somebody got out there and real close, and they saw men in the water, and then all hell broke loose. Dropped everything, they took everything and floated out in the harbor, and go out and then went out and started picking up survivors. Anyway, I got out, and they rescued me, and I spent about a week in a hospital treated for exposure. That was the thing. They didn't know the terms that they use today. Anyway, a young officer there was, I was completely nude because all my clothes, I couldn't hardly move. They were all so cold. And he puts me in this nice bed there with a clean white sheet.